So Megan had noted that it would be helpful if we had a chance to look at some quantitative and qualitative articles. So I just grabbed one because I didn't want to flood you guys with a ton of information and extra things to read. So I grabbed an article that I think is really easy to read. The author's really clear, and he uses both qualitative and quantitative data collection for his research questions. So I was just going to show you how he presented both cases and just walk you through like how we're going to do this. I also thought it would be a good idea to grid this article in class on Wednesday, and then I could post a video of how to do that based on what we found in the class for the online students the next day. So one of the things that makes this article great is you can tell immediately what it's about. The author says it's a survey of opinions on principles and practices of document design. So that's really clear. Sometimes you have to like read an entire article to figure out what type of method that they used. So I thought that was helpful. He uses both open and closed-ended questions, which I'll show you in a little bit. But just by looking at his abstract, you can tell immediately that he surveys 500 people who are working as technical communicators, and then also 500 technical communication teachers. And he explains his reasoning for both in his article. But he asks them to assess the ethics of 7 document design cases. He presents the results pretty clearly in his article abstract. The things that he's looking at are fitting information on a page, using persuasive coloring and spacing, pictorial illustrations, and then distorting graphics. And he talks about which ones people found to be unethical versus ethical. Later on, he talks about the explanations that he collected with his open-ended questions. So he says that readers offered 9 different types of explanations for areas of common practices, specifications, and so on. So I thought that was a pretty well written abstract where I could read this little paragraph and I had a good idea about what he was going to be talking about in the next 10 pages before I had to actually read all 10. You can see that he includes his actual survey that he handed out to everyone else. Let me scan down a little bit more. He talks about how he is defining some of these things, like nonverbal communication, and how those types of things are implied but not necessarily defined as ethical responsibilities. So he's just talking about how everyone has a different interpretation of what ethical means. So that's the whole purpose of his studies, to see what people define as being ethical or not. I just wanted to show you part of his survey where he has the Likert scale that we talked about on the first day, a range of 1 to 5. I talked about how you can do different statistical tests with this data, like t-tests, comparing groups. So maybe he wants to compare his technical communication practitioners to the people who are actually teaching the courses to see if their responses differ. And later you'll see that they do differ. He also provided over here an option for them to explain why they felt that this was ethical or not. So this is going to be the qualitative aspect of his design, and then this will be the quantitative aspect. So I'll show you what the results look like in a second. Just for the article gridding aspect, he does a pretty good job talking about how he pilot tested his survey with technical communication students and the limits and the limitations that testing with students versus actual practitioners has on his research. So I think he does a decent job talking about those limitations right here. You're also going to have to justify your opinion on doing different things. So he talks about how his role as a teacher, he needs to make sure that he's presenting this information so people can pass this on to others. He wants to be able to give them a clear picture of the profession and by teaching ethical principles that professional writers and editors espouse or oppose. Without this knowledge, I am giving my students a disservice. So this is how he's answering that purpose, so what question that I was talking about on the first day. Over on the left column, I just didn't want to scroll up and down. This is what I was talking about with the operationalization, where he says he does not give a definition of the word ethical because that's the whole purpose of his study. This is one of the ways that you can get around defining what you're talking about if you're still in the exploratory stages, because he's not sure what people are going to say to this. But he does address it in his research, so just make sure that's something that you guys are doing too. We'll look at this article in more detail on Wednesday during week 2 in class. But this is some of his quantitative findings where he is just showing the breakdown of people who responded to these surveys. So, you know how he set off to get 500 from each. Only 20% of the educators responded, whereas like 70% of the professional communicators did. So that may affect his results. So he's trying to be really clear about that. Um, so the percentages are just showing the breakdown. And then he talks about his breakdown in more detail. The chart was just to show a quick overview of things. He talks about the explanations and why he decided to include the open-ended questions for the qualitative aspect of his results. He needed to get insight on their thinking as well as their actions, and then he talks about how he analyzes them to verify its accuracy and consistency. He looked at a total of 3,267 explanations and categorized them into 9 different categories. So he talks about how he did that in the next part, but right now he's talking about the qualitative aspect. He pulled out some of the examples in a chart so you can see what some of the people had typed up as they answered his survey. I think this chart would have been more helpful if he would have been talking about like 90% responded that this is ethical or completely unethical. And then these were the qualitative aspects that they said to substantiate that quantitative number. So I think that would have been a little more balanced in presentation for how the data was interpreted. He's continuing to talk about the qualitative aspect where 273 participants, or 80%, offer 4 or more different types of explanations for their answers. Give some examples along the way, so you guys will probably be integrating some quotations for the qualitative study. And then he discusses to how this compares to the literature and what's been said before. What to do next, what he thinks about these findings, and so on. And let me just show you his reference list that he has borrowed because he needed to see what had been done before. So Gregory Clark had written an article on ethics in technical communication, a rhetorical perspective. So that was probably like a rhetorical analysis or discourse analysis, things like that. So it just shows like the different perspectives that have been used. Gerald Murch talks about using color and what's effective or not. Mark Monnier talks about how to lie with maps. So these are the things that he was using to build his argument along the way that this is something that needs to be researched and where do we stand. So we'll look at this article in more depth on Wednesday when we meet in class, and then we will use this to create a grid together. So you have an example article grid, and then you can use that to branch off into your own areas of research.